I would like to call to order the March 13th, 2019 meeting of the Design Review Board. Alexis, can we have roll call?
Board Member Burns?
Here.
Board Member Mitchell?
Here.
Board Member Kinley?
Here.
Board Member Perkins?
Here.
We have 4. That is a quorum.
Thank you. Well, welcome. I am Tamara Burns, the chairperson of the Design Review Board. I would like to take a minute today to relay the board's purpose and procedures. The Design Review Board is a 7-person volunteer citizen board appointed by the mayor and confirmed by the City Council. The purpose of the Design Review Board is to foster excellence in the design of Ann Arbor's built environment and to advise petitioners on how a project can meet the spirit and intent of the downtown design guidelines. We are mandatory review, voluntary compliance, meaning that projects have to come before us, but there is no legal requirement to follow our suggestions. 1 review is required, although we've been encouraging and been very successful in having petitioners come 2 or even 3 times as the project evolves. So from the beginning, we wanted to be as accessible as possible, hoping that the discussions between the board and the petitioners might help the general public in understanding the design considerations and outcomes, and in turn, encourage the community to push for excellence in design in our downtown. So we're very happy to be back upstairs where we are being broadcast to a wider audience. The procedure of the meeting is as follows. First, the applicant will present their proposed project to the Design Review Board. Then the applicant and the Design Review Board will hold a discussion on the design of the project. Following the presentation and discussion, members of the public are permitted to comment for up to 3 minutes. This is not a question and answer discussion period. All speakers are asked to sign in and state their name and address for the record. So moving on to our agenda, may I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved. Support.
So this is now open for discussion. Does anyone have any changes to the agenda?
No.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of, I think the items that I have are part of the issues, so. Agenda is approved. Moving on to the minutes, may I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved. Support.
It is now open for discussion. Are there any corrections to the minutes? Everybody have a chance to look at them? Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Minutes are approved. May I now have a motion to approve our recommendation letter? This was for 616 East Washington.
Move approved. Second.
Okay, that is now open for discussion. Any changes or corrections to the letter? Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So the recommendation letter is approved. Okay. Our next item on our agenda is a presentation for the proposed Energy Commission's Dark Sky Ordinance amendments.
Good afternoon. Thank you for allowing me to speak today. My name is John Mirsky. I'll introduce myself more fully on the second slide, which gives the participants of the group that's been working on this lighting ordinance. So maybe just some brief background. Well, let me go ahead and just do the presentation. Oops, let's see, I think I have to do this. There we are. So there has been a working group that's been working on a proposed lighting ordinance. The idea of a lighting ordinance first was floated or came to pass formally a couple of years ago when presentations were made to both the Environmental and the Energy Commissions. We loosely formed this group. It's under the auspices of the Energy Commission. I'm the second person shown there. I'm on the Energy Commission as well as the Environmental Commission, and I'm also serving as a sustainability advisor to the city administrator. We also have serving Sally Oey, who's at the University of Michigan in the Department of Astronomy. We also have 2 planning commissioners, Erica Briggs and Sarah Mills. We had also, as a technical consultant, someone who's got a lot of experience with lighting and lighting ordinances at the International Dark Skies Association in Arizona. And then we also had a woman who was involved with the establishment of the first dark skies park in the state of Michigan. Oops. So with some additional background is there's a Dark Skies Association in Michigan, and it's comprised of the following organizations that are listed. They have been also supportive of this process. So what's the rationale for a lighting ordinance? As you can see, light pollution has been increasing at roughly 6% per year, and obviously that depends on the locale. In some cases, that's been increasing at a rate of 20% per year. Light pollution, by definition, is essentially wasted energy. It really doesn't serve any purpose. And if you look at the pictures with the red and the yellow, yellow increases that shows that we have approximately a 2 times increase in the illumination levels than what we would call normal. And in the red zones, it's as high as 9 to 27 times higher. So you can see that there's been a significant increase in the amount of light pollution. You also could see that from the satellite photographs in the very first slide that I showed. So light pollution is partly driven by cheaper lighting and more efficient lighting. You can see that as the dash line has gone down, which is the cost of lighting, it's been essentially offset by greater per capita consumption of lighting. And so because of that, we feel that legislation is needed to be able to realize energy conservation as well as control light pollution and its negative impacts. So what is the impact of light pollution on the environment and human beings? First of all, in terms of circadian rhythms, it's clearly disrupted by artificial light at night, or the acronym is ALAN. That's been determined by the AMA, and I'll show you some more information, some positions that the AMA has taken. And it also disrupts ecosystems and wildlife, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So first of all, on the ecosystem and wildlife, in the upper left-hand corner, you see a picture of the number of birds that were killed in just one night when they hit a building in Ypsilanti, in downtown Ypsilanti. Michigan lies in the Great Lakes migratory area that birds use to fly north and south in the spring and in the fall. And a lot of collisions are caused by illumination at night. There is an organization called Safe Passage, which includes the organizations in the lower left that advocate for light being reduced or turned off during those seasons. And lights impact all of the different types of animals that are shown there: pollinators, insects, bees, even fish. So if there's excessive lighting, salmon cannot migrate properly. Not that we have a lot of that problem here in Michigan, but the AMA has also taken a strong position as far as artificial light at night, where it believes that light pollution is something that is causing health impacts in human beings. As you can see, it disrupts sleep. It causes glare, and I'll show you later in some slides the safety implications of glare, as well as the health implications of glare, where also it can actually be painful. And then also, it also has impacts on safety issues, as well as, for example, the design of lighting fixtures and things like that that would positively impact those implications or those effects. So there are 3 types of light pollution, first of all, glare. And glare is caused by light reflection within the eye. There's light trespass, and you can see here where the building in the middle is trespassing over a property line and impacting neighboring structures and inhabitants. And then you also have night glow. It's clear that more light is not necessarily safer light. Over illumination causes shadows, and I'll show you a slide where you can see that someone passing into a shadow can be hidden. Glare reduces visibility. Night vision is compromised, and what we really want to see is that the targets are illuminated and not anything else. So this is an example of how glare can actually, in improperly lit areas, can actually cause a problem. So you can see a student here walking and approaching into a lighted zone, and just a few steps later, that student basically completely disappears in the shadow. And this is not just a case where we have this in a pedestrian-only zone, but as everyone in Ann Arbor knows, I think from recent incidents, this is also a problem in areas where students are crossing streets, or for that matter, any pedestrian is crossing a street. Also, glare reduces visibility. So you can see here on the left cases where fixtures, luminaries are not shielded, and, oops, that's in PowerPoint you see it. Unfortunately, in the PDF version, you can't. So if, imagine on the right, if you have a shielded luminary, the person, I'm going to move my cursor right here. I don't know if you can see it. There's a person actually standing by a doorway right here. And by shielding that fixture, that person is much more easily seen. And the same thing here, there's actually a person standing right here in the gateway, and the glare makes it impossible to see that person. And simply by putting your hand up and covering that light fixture, you can see the person. Also, different types of light makes a difference. Blue light scatters far more, 3 to 5 times more than warmer lights, so that causes problems. We really want to see a shift away from high degree Kelvin lighting. So some of you may be familiar with the lighting scale for lighting and the warmth of lighting. Probably you all are, given your role on the board. And what we would really like to see is shifting more from like 5,000 K down into the 3,000, 2,700 K range, particularly for these types of applications. So what we really want are advocating in the lighting ordinance proposal is that we only want to light what is needed, no more than what is needed, when it's needed, and no bluer than needed. The analogy is depicted up in the upper right-hand corner with a faucet. You don't leave a faucet running just out of convenience, just so that you can walk up and put your hand underneath it. You actually want to illuminate, or you want to water things or use water only when it's needed, and we feel we should be doing the same thing with light for all the reasons that I just described. Just as for information, there are 6 Michigan state parks that are dark sky preserves. There's also 1 county park up near the Mackinac Straits that is also a dark sky preserve. So Michigan actually has 7 areas that are recognized by the Department of Natural Resources and by other entities as being actually an environmental benefit, an economic benefit to the state of Michigan. We actually have people as tourists that are coming specifically to these sites to be able to observe the dark skies in the evening. As I mentioned, we feel that this is something that's consistent with the kind of image and the kind of city that Ann Arbor wants to be. Some of these discussions about a lighting ordinance actually go back roughly 15 years. We found some documents where there were indications that lighting was a concern, and there was investigations into a possible lighting ordinance, but unfortunately, that didn't go anywhere. So as I mentioned a couple years ago, this was resurrected. The goals of the lighting ordinance is to protect public health and safety. That's consistent with Ann Arbor's sustainability framework, also protecting the environment. Also, there are goals with the sustainability framework relating to protecting the environment, protecting energy efficiency, reducing costs to the city, to public servants, and to citizens, to support nighttime activities, and also to retain and enhance the character of the city. This is a rough roadmap. The formal portion of developing a lighting ordinance goes back to August of last year. As I mentioned, there were a couple of presentations to the Energy and Environmental Commissions prior to that. But we had a meeting with the Planning Commission in August of last year. In that meeting, we were able to recruit 2 members, as I mentioned, from the Planning Commission who have been serving on the working group. We've been meeting roughly every 2 to 4 weeks over the course of that time to draft an ordinance. I'll get into some more details here in a second. That was reviewed with Councilmember Griswold in February. As you probably know, she has a real interest in pedestrian safety, and we wanted to make sure that we had coordinated with her. And this month, we're meeting with 3 different groups. Yesterday, the ordinance was presented to the Planning Commission in a working session. I'm meeting before you today and giving you the background. And then tomorrow, there's another meeting with the Historic District Commission. And what we're seeking, not necessarily today, because we know you have a lot of other things on the docket, is to get your feedback on the ordinance. And hopefully then, in the April to May timeframe, get endorsements by the 3 commissions that are shown here, where then we would go to a public hearing on the lighting ordinance with the hope that this would then advance to City Council and potentially take effect sometime in the middle of the summer. What we did in our work is we consulted a number of lighting ordinances that are in the public domain and that have been enacted. I mentioned one of the individuals on the working group came from the International Dark Skies Association. They have 2 model lighting ordinances. One dates back to 2011. The other was updated last year. In Pennsylvania, there is also a group that's been advocating for lighting ordinances. It's the Pennsylvania Outdoor Lighting Council. They have 3 different model lighting ordinances that we looked at, and they have been implemented, I believe it is, in 24 different municipal entities in primarily eastern Pennsylvania. We also looked at the lighting ordinance from Plymouth, Minnesota. As you can see, it's known for its ranking by Money Magazine as the #1 place to live in 2008. And as you can see, they implemented a lighting ordinance in 2004 based on an old International Dark Skies Association lighting ordinance. We also looked at a lighting ordinance from Tucson, Arizona, and then one written by a gentleman, Chris Lingenbuhl, who works at an observatory station in Flagstaff, Arizona. What we're seeking is input and your endorsement, particularly on a couple of areas. We think of particular relevance to the Design Review Board is facades. And also there's a section dealing with curfews where we're recommending that lighting where it's not really serving a useful purpose, only an aesthetic purpose, that lighting would be shut off after midnight and then not turn on until dawn. Of course, we're interested in feedback on any other sections. There was a lot of feedback that was provided by the Planning Commission last night, and I have and could forward to you a revised, let's say, working document of the lighting ordinance based on their comments. So there are some differences compared to the lighting ordinance that was sent to you in advance of the meeting, and you may want to take that into consideration. Another thing that was done that may be of interest that I could forward to you is 2 members of the working group drove around town and took photographs and took a lot of readings of different lighting applications around the city, parking lots, building facades, buildings. It may be no surprise that the brightest building that's lit in Ann Arbor is the Michigan Theater with the lighting out front. And if you're interested, I can provide those to you. So that's my formal presentation, and I'm open to take any questions at this time.
Thank you very much.
Well, I would like to say that as an amateur astronomer, I'm really happy to see this going forward. I wish it could have happened a long time ago, but it hasn't. But so I'm happy to see the group doing this. Has any thought been given to the city of Ann Arbor and the university employ some very sky polluting type light fixtures? Is there any discussion about trying to replace those with something that directs the light only down?
So maybe a couple of things that I should have mentioned earlier in response to your general questions. First of all, this lighting ordinance only applies initially to public and private property. So their lighting that's in the public right of way, so that means street lighting, would be handled in a second step. So the city has something, as you probably know, called the Orange Book. I forget the formal name. I can look it up here in a second. What is it called again?
That's the way we refer to it.
Yeah, okay. I think it's, yeah, it's commonly known as the Orange Book, some standard specifications. We intend to take up lighting in those areas, in those public right-of-ways as a second step. We wanted to do this first, see that there was general support for a lighting ordinance. If there was, and with the approach that we've taken, then take the second step of recommending changes to the Orange Book. As far as existing fixtures is concerned, there is an exemption portion at the beginning, and what the exemption does is it basically exempts all existing fixtures, and except for when there are major renovations or there is new construction. And we also have a clause in there that says that 10 years from the time that the ordinance would take effect, that lighting would have to retroactively be updated so it's in conformance with the ordinance. Feedback from the Planning Commission was that elements of the UDC, which would be the lighting ordinance, it may not be possible to have what is termed amortization of pre-existing conditions. So that's something that the Planning Commission and the Lighting Ordinance Working Group will be looking into. But you're absolutely right. A lot of the original LED fixtures that the city and the university installed, which were these LED globes, they're shooting light in every single direction. And of course, a lot of that is going up into the sky and really serving no purpose whatsoever. It's contributing to light pollution. It's actually inefficient because we're lighting things that we don't need to light. So we would like to be able to see some kind of long-term compliance, but that's something we have to determine together with the Planning Commission and the City Attorney's Office.
And a second question is, are there any proposals to change the amount of light that's needed for walkways and egress areas, parking lot, pedestrian friendly zones?
So yeah, those are all regulated by light trespass and by illuminance values. So illuminance values are basically the light intensity that's measured over a defined area. So we've specified values, and we've looked at the best practices from all these other different areas, and we're addressing those. We're addressing parking lots, we're addressing athletic fields, we're addressing just even the kinds of luminaries that would be put at the entrance of a building. So we would basically be covering all that if it's on private property. And then, like I said, in a second step, for the Orange Book and public right-of-way.
I believe that Scioto Township has a dark sky ordinance. Would it be similar to that?
That actually didn't come up in our discussions. I don't know that they do. I don't know if it takes, do you think it takes the form of a lighting ordinance?
Any development we've done there, we've had to have all the light fixtures comply with dark sky.
You did?
Yes.
Okay. Scioto Township.
Yes.
Okay, we'll look into that.
John, I noticed your first goal is public safety, and under your 4 items, your first goal is do what is needed. So when architects submit site plans for review, it goes through all the city agencies, including law enforcement.
Yes.
Are you finding that there's a differing opinion about what is needed and what comprises public safety? That's always been the driver.
Well, there certainly, I mean, we saw variances in the various lighting fixtures or the ordinances that we reviewed. There isn't just one common denominator that everybody seems to be using. And that's why we looked at all these different ordinances. For example, there's also some compromises that we wanted to make in the sense that, for example, Bloomington, Minnesota defines, I think it is 4 or 5 lighting zones. So on top of the normal zoning that they have, they go from areas that are basically natural areas to downtown commercial areas, and they define lighting zones, and then they define what is the allowable, let's say, illumination levels for each one of those zones. And when we talked to the Planning Commission, their recommendation, this was in the very early meeting, was that we not make things that complicated, that we simply try to differentiate between residential and commercial areas according to the zoning that we have, and not have multiple layers of complexity and different types of lighting for different areas. So did that sort of answer your question, or?
It sort of does.
Okay, ask another one then.
No,
Okay.
you're fine. No, we're thankful. This is great.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, appreciate it. I think we're all supportive of it.
Very good. Good to hear it. So I'll go ahead and forward the latest draft, if you will, with input from the Planning Commission. Actually, we're trying to meet, I think it is Monday of next week, so I'll double check on that. If it's going to be later than that, I'll send you the update right away. I may wait until after that because hopefully we'll cleaned up a lot of things and we'll get you that by Monday. And then I can also send you some of the examples with photographs and the illumination levels of current buildings, so you have that as a standard of reference.
Okay.
Very good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for your support.
All right, our next item is 545 South Main Street, and I'd like to first ask Alexis to give her staff report on that.
Sure, thank you. Thank you. We have reviewed 545 South Main Street for some basic compliance with the zoning ordinance and development standards, and as well as our take on, I have done this before. Planning staff have reviewed the 545 South Main Street project DR 19-002 for compliance with the basic zoning compliance as well as the design guidelines. First off, a quick introduction. This is a project to redevelop the 545 South Main Street into a brewery restaurant. It's about a 1-acre site, 45,000 square feet. It currently contains 2 multi-bay sheds and a 1-story, now vacant lumber and millwork building. The plan is to remodel, renovate, expand the industrial building, remove a significant amount of the asphalt paving, and create a loading area and a small parking lot as well as outdoor entertainment space. It's got a few issues in terms of compliance with basic zoning requirements. It has a non-conforming street wall, meaning that the building is not between 0 and 10 feet from the front property line. It also doesn't comply with the minimum building height requirement. Buildings in the D2 district require buildings to be at least 2 stories in height. It has a corner that is adjacent to a residential district, but it does not have a conflicting land use buffer or the proper setback when adjacent to residential. And the building is in the floodplain. 2 of the buildings are in the floodplain. 1 of the buildings is in the floodway. And none of them are flood-proofed, and none of them are currently flood-proofed. We generally discourage buildings from the floodway. My review of for the compliance with, and furthering the spirit of the downtown design guidelines, in conversational terms, it didn't look good because there is this underlying assumption of the downtown design guidelines that a design plan will propose a very large project, full demolition, or at least a significant expansion, so that you approach the maximum FAR allowed. The guidelines don't really address adaptive reuse of existing sites. So in that sense, when you compare the proposed project to the guidelines, it does not further most of them. But there are many redeeming qualities. The project is generally a good thing. So because of the underlying assumptions and the lack of great guidance, staff focused on applying the overarching goals of the design guideline and the intent of each level rather than some of the specific strategies recommended. Overall, we found that the site context and planning guidelines talk about supporting a downtown place and supporting the pedestrian experience. And so to that end, the site could use a better primary entrance. The use of the lawn area should be explained. The number of curb cuts should be the minimum necessary. The use of the shed should be clarified. They should be functional and supportive, not as merely as decoration, particularly in light of the floodplain. Regarding building elements, the building elements call for features and details at the street edge. There's not much street edge presence here. In summary, the issue seems to be the inward focus of the design plan, whereas in a downtown, you are looking for buildings and functions to be open and engaging, outward facing. So a balance needs to be found between adaptively reusing this industrial facility and contributing to the vibrancy of downtown.
Thank you, Alexis.
I didn't have time to drive by the site, so I'm not 100% familiar with it. So these buildings are all existing?
Yes.
You're going to do a presentation.
Yeah.
Ah, okay.
There are some existing photographs of the site in the design plan packet, and the design team will do a presentation.
Yeah, if you would come up at this time and introduce yourselves and your project.
I wasn't ever, we used to use them, but I never went there.
I'll also take 1 second to mention, which I should have done, the staff report was prepared with the original submittal. I understand that some revisions have taken place since then, and I'm sure that the design team will present those.
Thank you. Can I load a jump drive into this system? Is that the best way
Yep.
to do that? Thank you. Right here. Thank you. That is my best map.
And then if you probably would work with the X out of here.
Right. Yeah. So you can get the bearing here.
I just put it on here.
Right.
Left.
Yeah, going that same files, where that go over?
There it is. Thank you. Thank you very much. Excellent. Thank you, Design Review Board. I am Kurt Catello from Union Joints. I'm here with my wife and partner, Ann Stevenson, and Eric Lyons, our managing partner, and Tomas van Staden from Van Staden Architects, who drew the plan that was submitted to you. Before I let the expert, being Tomas, take over and walk you through the vision for this property, I wanted to give you a quick overview of what we envisioned for this former mill site in Ann Arbor. Generally speaking, it's a project that...
Microphone.
Oh. Thank you. Generally speaking, this is a project that we've been working on for years, actually. It's like many Union Joints projects, it has a long gestation period, because if it didn't, it wouldn't be something that interested us. We tend to pick projects that are a challenge, because at the end of the day, we know that it'll deliver something you don't find elsewhere. And that's that kind of unique and authentic experience is something that matters to us as a little restaurant group. When I say little, we've been around since 1995, and we currently have about 875 employees working at our 8 locations and ad agency. We're an independent restaurant, and we have a very independent spirit, and we love problem solving. So a little look at what we've done is we like to say that that we start with a challenge and we kind of work our way forward. And from 1995, when we repurposed the former Baptist Church on Main Street in Clarkston, to the parsonage next door, which is Union General, to a gas station in Berkeley, which is Vincetta Garage, which is the oldest family-owned service station east of the Mississippi. We have a downtown storefront in Clarkston, which is the Union Wood Shop, built in 1929. The city of Fenton gave us their first fire hall, the Fenton Firehall, and we repurposed that, and a pump house next to it. We've done a former Dairy Queen into a bunkhouse drive-through recently, and then Ann checked off something on her bucket list and repurposed a former Hooters in Rochester, Michigan as Grand Castor, a joint that we opened recently. But I think that all of these places, including our home base, which is an old Union school that was a Ford factory during the war, which was then Independence Township Hall, so it essentially served as this building does today for the smaller community of Clarkston. We kind of pride ourselves on taking something and bringing it back to life in a way that respects its heritage while repurposing it in a way that makes it viable for the future. So I like to say that that we look for buildings that aren't run-of-the-mill, and I think it's pretty ironic that a mill would fit those qualities. As you know, it's an interesting structure in that it is not historic, but it's been around for a long time, and it has a certain presence, and it has something that we're always attracted to, which is a patina. It has a definite purpose in its construction and a definite character in the way it was built and the way it's weathered the history. And those are things that Ann, as our lead designer, works with in the space, but more importantly, it's something that we try to tie through the whole experience. The food that we serve is authentic. The food that we serve is real. We don't hide behind edifice, and our buildings are the same way. We take a very honest approach to everything we do, whether it's the architecture, the design, or the menu itself. I mean, we're the kind of restaurant group where our servers don't have uniforms. We hire on experience. We hire on care. We want everything to be as real as possible, and since 1995, it's paid off for us. I mean, we serve a very unique version of comfort food in that it's based on the basics, but it's still amplified in that what we do with more care than most would expect out of a dish of, say, mac and cheese. I always say that part of our purpose is repurposing. That's why you look at these buildings that we've dedicated our lives to, and whether they're former churches or former service stations, these are buildings that always served one unique purpose, but were destined to serve another. And I think as far as Fingerly is concerned, it checks a lot of boxes for us in that it's always served one purpose. At no point did it become anything but what it was built to be, which is this mill. And so for us to have the opportunity to repurpose it, it allows us to start with this blank canvas, this baseline that we're going to build upon. And that's really what Tomas will take you through. If you look at our organization itself, as I said, it started with the Clarkston Union in 1995. really this church, very communal, hardy, ironically built with fingerly lumber from the day. It's a relationship that we have that stretches that far back because Cameron Magoon, who's our builder on these projects, is from Ann Arbor at the time. Ann Stevenson, who designed this, was living in the Old West Side. So this neighborhood, this area has been on our radar for a long time. And the kind of food that we do in Clarkston we think is communal and would have a good home in Ann Arbor. I should say, before I forget, that the descriptions that have come out based on the material that we submitted to the Design Review Board call it a brewery. Our intention is not to brew at this location. When we opened the Clarkston Union in 1995, we had 36 beers on tap because we knew that we could buy better beer than we could brew. So that's true today, too. We love microbrews. We really support the craft brew industry. And this will not be a brewery. It will just be a restaurant that has great craft beer. If you look at Union General, a store next door, Ann and I and our 2 kids live above it and have for years. This is a true general store, but again, it's baked goods, it's individual items, it's bath and body, it's curated, and it's built with care. And again, it's in a former parsonage, and when you're inside, you know that you're in a building that's unique. The same is true of the Union Wood Shop. This was always a restaurant in downtown Clarkston, always on Main Street. But when we repurposed it into this wood shop, we kind of took that approach, that honest look at it, and just celebrated what we produce in that space, which is barbecue. We were fortunate to be the Detroit Free Press Restaurant of the Year, and it's got national attention for whatever reason, and it's really because we're doing something that's authentic. So whether it's Thrill List Best Barbecue or Southern Living Magazine noticing what's going on in Main Street, that kind of attention means a lot to us and our chefs and cooks. The Wood Shop is a repurposed space above it that is essentially a bar. It's essentially an area that seats 75 to 100 people that is just all inviting. There'll be kids playing skee ball in there, kids playing pool while they wait for tables. It's just a very inviting and original setting. Vincetta Garage, as I said, was the oldest family-owned garage east of the Mississippi when we took it over with our partner Casey Crane. And it's been getting a lot of attention for many reasons, but one is because of the food that we do out of there is very in character with the space itself. It's big, it's authentic, it's hearty, it's the kind of food that you would have expected the mechanics to have had during their lunch breaks in the day. And ironically, when we had the mechanics reunion for all the wrenches that used to work there, they sat in the back room and had hamburgers and pizzas, and they said, you know, the strange thing is that this was our break room back in the day. So for us, that kind of poetry of coming full circle means something to us. The same can be said as Fenton Firehall. This was a project that the Fenton's DDA put out for review, and we were fortunate enough that they chose Union Joints to take over this project. So they gave us the building and $100,000 to essentially put the Fenton Firehall in this space. Again, it's 3 layers, it's 3 levels. We put an addition on there to service the bathrooms because it was a volunteer fire department, so they didn't need a lot of bathrooms for volunteer firefighters. So this has an addition, and it has 3 floors that are activated. I think it's very similar to what we've learned in Fenton is what we want to bring to Ann Arbor, and that this kind of activation and bustle on these 3 levels is exciting, and it's exactly why the City of Fenton chose us. The City of Fenton also submitted this project to the Michigan Municipal League, and it won the region, and then we went up to Marquette with the City of Fenton to present this for the Michigan Municipal League at their statewide conference. So it means a lot to the city because, again, they took this area which was essentially abandoned when they vacated for their bigger fire station and created a little sense of bustle that is serviced in this little park setting. And it joins an older part of town, which they call Dibbleville, and some new developments, which are just beyond us, which is the new Fenton. And this bridge did exactly what they hoped it would do, which is create traffic in this otherwise dormant area. So we're very fortunate about it. One of the other things that the City of Fenton did is they gave us this former pump house, which is on the banks of the Shiawassee River by this waterfall and gazebo in the city park. This is something that we run all summer long. We call it the Pump House. It's our handcrafted liquid nitrogen ice cream. And again, people will be in the park. They'll be fishing. They'll be kayaking. There'll be weddings going on, concerts in the park. And then this little pump house services them with our ice cream and shakes and such. And again, it creates an energy in an area that previously was just really a gazebo and a waterfall. Honcho, which is a restaurant in Clarkson, which is in a former auto shop, which then is conjoined to a gas station. We made these two buildings into one and created Honcho, which is a Latin street food joint. And again, we have outposts of this at the DT Energy Music Theater, but it's just very approachable, very fun, and it's food that you'd expect in that it's a taco, but we kind of put more care into it than you might expect, and that's why we won the Detroit Taco Fest in the city of Detroit 2 years ago. Grand Castor is an evolution of that in that former Hooters. Just again, a very big restaurant. It's 200 seats. It's bustle. It's on a very busy corner at Rochester Road and Big Beaver. And it has an outside seating, which is on a very busy thoroughfare. But again, it creates some energy on this otherwise highly active corridor of Big Beaver. We're very proud of that, and that we kept some of these Hooter influences, but still repurposed it into something that's decidedly unique. And then Bunkhouse Burgers, which we just opened in December, is a former Dairy Queen that serves little hamburgers, sliders off the grill, little quarter pounders for $5 that cars line up for, and we're very fortunate. It's the kind of food that you could see people grabbing and walk into the stadium on game day, and it's no different than what we're doing there in Clarkson and making the most of it. So between Ann, Eric, and I, we've been doing this since 1995. And one thing that we try to do is every step of the way is we remember that what got us here is working closely with the community, to doing everything we can so that we're not just coming in and serving people food. We try to serve the community in bigger ways, any way we can. And I think one of the reasons that we've been able to do what we do is that we have a very high retention rate with our staff. So out of these 875 people, the core group has been with us from the get-go. Our cooks became chefs, our servers became managers, our dishwashers became bartenders. So there's this evolution, and one of the things that we've always been drawn for is giving people the opportunity. And we think that Ann Arbor, with the opportunity to bring our talent at the front of the house here and really take advantage of the folks that are able to work here. 30% of the people that work at our restaurants work within that zip code. And so we think that the walkability, the fact that there's this young labor force in Ann Arbor will make this a special place, not just for the people that are running it, but for the people who are interested in the culinary arts and want to join us for a longer stint than a summer job. What we've been able to do is get recognition beyond our footprint. So these are just some of the accolades that we've received. And whether it's the Huffington Post or Esquire naming us one of the best bars in America, these are things that matter because they give us some perspective as to how we're doing in a bigger game. And as far as Fort Fingerly, we think this has a really special opportunity to kind of be part of the Union Joints family and continue that narrative, that passion that we have for repurposing. So this is just kind of a general mood book that Ann put together, and it's just kind of the flavors of the joint, which is leveraging a patina, leveraging an authenticity, and making the most of something. I mean, we know this area, and I think that it's fair to say that what we try to do with the space, and Ann will tell me if I'm speaking out of line, is that we want the space to be like the menu itself, and that it's something that's at once familiar and surprising. So there's nothing in here that's necessarily unfamiliar, but the way we do it is authentic and real and inviting. And at the end of the day, you're going to know that the experience that we've created at any of our joints is different than anything you could build on a pad site. I mean, when you walk to Fort Fingerly and see this green space, it draws you in off Main or Madison, and it starts this narrative that you're not going to get if you just pull into a parking lot at a Meijer and then go to whatever restaurant was built on the pad site. These are things that matter to us, and I think if you look at the way we've planned it, you're going to know that this is something that could only be in this building. This is something you're not going to find at every third exit on I-94 because it plays to the building's purpose. It plays to what you have here, and I think that that authenticity is what makes the difference in the space, in the way we do it, and just creating this narrative, whether it's walking in off Main Street and sitting outside or playing ping pong or doing putt-putt golf on the green space, going to the shed, grabbing a walking taco on your way to game day. being on the roof and just looking out at the bustle of Ann Arbor and the energy of the city. These are all things that you're not going to get anywhere else, and we're going to play to all those strengths. So I'll turn it over to Tomasz now just to really walk you through the vision for the footprint itself. And I know the DRB had some specific questions that he's better to answer than I, but we just want to say that we're honored to have the opportunity to bring everything we've learned in 25 years of repurposing to this specific project. And we think at the end of the day, it's an opportunity for placemaking that we haven't found anywhere else, and we're excited to find it here. Tomasz?
So, hello everybody. My name is Tomasz von Staden from von Staden Architects, and have the extreme pleasure of working with the Union Joints crew. An incredible bunch, and I actually moved here in 1994 and was very happy when they opened up their first place in 1995. So it's been a pleasure to know them from a distance and get to know them more recently. So the first thing I guess I would say before anything is I looked intensively through the design guidelines, and I guess there's two ways to read them. The one is that we're looking at a position where you're taking something down, you're building again. But to me, the origins of those design guidelines come from conditions like this. They come from recognizing the district that you're in, the shape of the land, the topography, the context, what you have built around it, the railroad tracks, the floodplain, a river that was there, and all these things. And so for me, when I sort of step aside and I walk down that hill and I come past the residential unit on the east side, and you roll into the site, there's something so natural and wonderful about that opening in the site and the corner there. So I think that there's a lot of ways to look through this. So I can read it and say, well, we're addressing every single one of those things in a way that we think is really dynamic.
Microphone, please.
Sorry. So anyway, so I enjoy that rub, because I think when you look at architecture and development in cities, you can really read these things two ways. But the origin of them comes from the richness that comes from history, I would argue, always. And the things that the design guidelines recognize are craft and thoughtfulness in the history of architecture that we're all fighting for now in the midst of flat architecture, right? And buildings that are too tall and not set back. So that's my sort of starting thing with stuff. The site, as you guys probably know, borders Madison and Main Street. It has the cut of the railroad tracks. There is the one shed that sits right adjacent to it, running the length of it. That shed has doors on it, it's closed. The upper shed on the north side is an open shed, quite a bit taller, different in its posture, perhaps peering out over the site. And then there is the cast-in-place concrete building, which had the old mill shop in it. And adjacent to that is a block structure with a corrugated and fiberglass second story on top of that. So we do have a second story, little one. So that is the context. I was a bit surprised in really walking around at how little some of the adjacent buildings have done to address the streetscape and the pedestrian experience, and it's something that we've thought about a lot. I also think that there's something very important in this district about finding moments when we can preserve and repurpose that structure into something else for another experience. And so I love the fact that really we haven't talked about renovation, we've talked about repurposing. And repurposing allows you to sit inside of something as it was and experiencing it, re-experience it. And I think that's very different than the sort of renovation that comes in and cleans something out to the point where all that's left is a brick, right? You say, well, that's a nice brick wall, but there's nothing about the fact that this was, you know, a mill site, right? So important, I think, to hold on to. These are some photos of the site. So looking through the upper left-hand side is looking from Madison into the site. It's pretty boxed in with the way the angle of the street goes. And then going across that top is the cast-in-place concrete building that we're proposing putting in the second floor. Patio space on deck space. Middle left shows the two-story structure block with the siding on it that's proposed to have the kitchen and takeout on the first floor with a second floor bar and private dining. Bottom left is the open shed on the north side. Middle, bottom, you're seeing from that alley side on the east side, the back of the building. So those are some contextual photos. So this was a site plan that we forwarded to you at first, and there was some mixed responses to it, and they were great, really good feedback that we got from Alexis, so thank you very much. So we thought we had some pedestrian issues, some delivery issues. Spending more time walking Main Street, we really felt like it was important that that became a really inviting entry off of that side. So this is what we had sent you guys. Since then, we've revised it to provide delivery section on the north side with dumpsters in the back, and kept the southern parking lot. We've also introduced 2 areas, so we now have a separate. Am I in trouble? Oh, sorry, I didn't even think about that. Thanks. I was too excited.
Maybe not.
Oh, I think it would go into. Maybe I'll right there. No.
Oh, no, I missed. There we go.
That's how to get rid of that. Sidebar? Do you, youngster?
There's usually a.
See up in the top.
It's along the top.
Up, right there.
Yeah, I don't know. What did you do? You went for the view, right?
Control L.
Great, okay.
Boom.
All right, thank you. So, original site plan that was submitted, revised site plan, and so there's a few things that we thought with this. One, we really liked the fact that it became a more welcoming and framed out entry. We can use the old curb cut coming off of Main Street if we do this, which keeps the size of the curb cut down quite a bit. It also allows us to frame out a pedestrian sidewalk coming off the street there, so this now is a dedicated pedestrian access here, and it really kind of gave us a more contiguous framed out green space to work within here. On the Madison side, we have an entry that comes actually on the corner of the lot here. It actually cuts through the existing shed. There's an opening in there, and then there's a covered bike storage area here, and it connects around the side this way. So again, trying to give something that gave an experience on that southern side of being able to move through some of the history. You know, it's a tight area, but we like the idea of getting that pedestrian circulation to actually activate that existing building, giving people in this urban scenario a chance to put their bike on site, give some control for safety, also for cover there, and leads in a nice way right into the green space there. So that was originally that parking plan. It allows us to put the dumpsters in the back on the top side and have ample space for deliveries. That upper area, we still think, we've always wanted to be able to use the north shed in some ways, so we think it's possible at times to actually close off the parking on that top side when deliveries are done in the middle of the day and use that upper area and activate it with secondary seating areas for events. So game day type events, we probably wouldn't be parking on that northern part of the site and using that as a place that becomes fully activated. Love the idea in this low area of getting rid of the asphalt, having green space. I think when one looks around at the open spaces in Ann Arbor, and I think that, you know, most architects, the first thing you want to do is put paving down and put planters in and take over, right? And so I think in a way, it's interesting to think about the sort of history of open space and how people used it. And so in the olden days, if you had a beautiful estate, you had somebody set up a table in the middle of the grass and you ate in the middle of the grass. Now you make a paved outdoor room with a fire pit and a serving thing and a grill and a gazebo and all this. And in our opinion, it's a bit overbuilt to allow for that sort of freedom and openness and quiet occupation of the space. So we kind of like the idea of really, especially in the midst of Ann Arbor where there's a lot of hardscape, having a larger soft area in there. I don't know how much you guys want to get into the floor plans. It's really more interior stuff. So this is showing the block building with a kitchen in it, cast in place concrete building, largely untouched. We're redoing the, extending the windows in height in here, so they've been filled in with some corrugated metal on the bottom over time, and so we're doing a bifold wooden door with a true divided light in it. This is a wood stove piece here, and the bar built against the corner here. The building looks like it was done in lifts of poured concrete, so it has a really wonderful texture on the walls that comes from that sort of pouring when things are stacked up unevenly. So we're trying to kind of go into this quietly. So this whole wall is actually an unpainted old wall that really has that beautiful kind of pattern to it. So again, just allowing the building to come to us and give us a little bit of advice. This is showing second floor, so we have a staircase, a couple different staircases coming up to here, some back of house, bar area and private vent space. There's an existing roll-up garage door, very typical of a second floor mill lumber yard. We're adding another one over here. So with the thought that those could be rolled up, and then you have connection to that whole courtyard. And then again, because we're low in terms of topography there, the idea of occupying the second level in the patio space, again, allows this other extension and connection to the urban fabric that is really pretty important, and I think could be quite dynamic as people are moving up and down into the landscape. These are the building elevations. So for the most part, these are all really just existing openings that we're coming in and putting new windows into. This is a bifold side folding door, somewhat reminiscent of an old sort of carriage door with a little bit of a twist with a diagonal fenestration pattern in here. Again, to a pretty flat cast-in-place concrete wall, just trying to bring some texture and pattern to it. There's two different entries. This entry is the one that you would see coming down through the courtyard if you came down Main Street, and then there's a new entry vestibule over here that would come off of the Madison side. Existing roll-up door, new roll-up door here for that second-story space. These are stair and elevator connections and enclosures that come up onto the top of the roof. They're a small setback gabled section. Again, like the descriptor on this that we would use is trying to think about the old factories or the old mills where you would have a conveyor and that roof structure would somewhat follow that conveyor. So it's really kind of, let's call it form follows that function up there. The deck, what we're doing, there's a pretty little edge on the concrete, so we're setting the deck back a little bit, that patio, about 16 inches back, so there's an articulation of the old concrete structure in front, and then that patio deck starts behind that. And again, just important to us to have that front concrete piece read through and stand strong. Again, here, this addition off this side, allowing the concrete piece to run through higher up there. We do have an exterior staircase coming down here on the far end of the patio space. And then this we just did for the sake of giving you some sense of coloring. So this is white, and this the thought for now is to leave this existing red and green patterning that is on that second story of the building. These elevations somewhat untouched. You're just seeing this addition of the roof structure and the elevator here. This is the backside that alleys onto the adjacent University of Michigan building. And again, this is just a one side, sort of service side of the two-story building. Again, looking through the materials here. Cross sections, which to some helpful. So this is the kitchen inside the two-story space. A little bit higher dining area. Proposed entry a little bit lower than that. This is the second floor private dining space with a staircase that connects you up to the rooftop. These are shed elevations, and I can explain a little bit more in these, and they might be a little bit dark to see rendering-wise, but what we're proposing doing with the sheds now is this upper shed. So this is a view looking in from Main Street. you can see here the 2 garage doors here. There's an entry door to take out here. This is the main entry on this side, parking lot through here, and then we have pedestrian access that comes along there. This shed on this side by the railroad tracks, it right now has a series of multi-slide doors that are a little bit in a state of disrepair. So what we're thinking about doing is running a new steel beam in front of them and having the doors slide off to the side so that they completely open up. And the idea in those that shed particularly, is to be able to use that as a 3-season dining area. So the shed would become completely open, occupy it in a way that was pretty quiet, so it's going to have minimal services inside of it, and really just cut that asphalt back to the edge of it so the grass really would just run up against it. So here you can see this is from the Madison side, looking in, parking lot. This is the area where there's bike storage, and the circulation out kind of comes around this corner. The green space in here. This is new entry. So we felt like it was important to have one, with the 2 entries that each of them has a face that's opening up onto the streetscape, so you're able to identify that. You can see here, this is the shed wide open now. So it's really quite an engaging piece for that courtyard. It really frames it out nicely. So we have a nice dynamic, we feel, between this dining side. The doors in that whole dining side open up. Shed can open up on this side. This is just kind of a clip, and it's hard to get this perspective, but here's the sidewalk, and this is our proposed pedestrian access going through the shed. Back in here is bicycle storage, and you kind of come around that side to the entry here. So some of it is, that sort of, right, if you think about how paths go, people take the path of least resistance. So in this case, at least if we can make this path somewhat enticing and moving through this piece of history, the hope is that people will use that pedestrian access more than just going straight through the parking lot. And then this is just a closer-up view. So in some cases, building element-wise, right now, there's an existing little roof section with a gorgeous little transom piece over this. So in this case, we're really just following that back down and taking what was infilled with metal over time and really kind of returning that back to what seems like it would be appropriate for the time period. Here you can see the corner of one of the new glass pieces. So we're increasing the light by probably 30–40% into the building that way. This is another view internally, so edge of the grass, some smokers out here, and then access into the kitchen there. So that's where we are. I can certainly go through. I mean, when I sat back and kind of bullet pointed for myself the context, buildings, building elements, I mean, to me, I think there's a way to speak to each of those conditions that's covered in the project. If there's questions about stuff, I can go through things. I don't want to kind of bore you with, I think, so.
Well, this is great. It's a lot clearer, these new renderings. So.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that the buildings the main building is all designed to be flood-proof the way the requirements.
Yeah, so we're going to have barricades and a deployment strategy, which seems fitting for a mill site. So there will be a bay in the garage, and there will be the brackets on the sides. And we've gone through and talked with Jerry a bit about it, and we feel pretty comfortable with the approach we're taking now. Yeah, and I think even in the case of, for example, the one shed that's on the tracks, we've talked to him about doing some flow-through louvers that, would at least allow the thing not to fly away, right? So we're pretty confident in how that's set up now, and it's really in keeping with the site and the spirit of the project too.
There's been historically a lot of flooding in that part of town, but more over toward where Fingerly showrooms are and so forth. Mm-hmm. Has this site, talking to the Fingerlys, or do they ever remember this site being underwater?
They don't remember being underwater. It seems as though it's come up to the sort of delivery height, but not ever much above that, and it tends to go away quite quickly. So there's no evidence that I can see. I mean, we've done quite a few flood area projects before. There's no evidence that I can see of anything coming up and creeping. You would see it in the concrete typically, you'd see a stain line in there. So I don't see anything that's ever gotten above that main floor height.
Well, I really like the idea of being able to adaptively reuse a building like this. My offices used to be in an old mill building that used to belong to Washington Lumber Company, and we had a very nice time turning that into our offices. And I'm really glad to see something like this happening with this building instead of just bulldozing it and starting over. That's just my personal feeling about it. The folding doors that have the sort of herringbone, are those doors or are they windows?
They're, let's see, there's a better shot. Maybe not. They're doors. Yeah.
So there will be some kind of steps out in front of them to get down to the lawn level?
Yeah, either a step or we'll have a rail. We're sort of working through some of the grading issues there and finalizing the heights with the civil engineers. So we're either going to have a rail and open them, or we'd put a step in front of them. But they're a full height door, yep.
With glass, right?
Yeah, with glass, yeah. And really, I think, and Ann can certainly hit me in the back of the head, but in my mind, I think that they would probably be built in a way that feels as though somebody set up to make old windows in the olden days, right? Like all windows were built primarily on a job site historically. They had that sense of you took the router bit out, you cut the profile, you put the piece of glass in it. And so I think there seems like there's some, sorry, okay. So I think that there's something wonderful about thinking about, there's so few things, these windows, there's just not that many of them, the doors, to pay attention to them and put them back in a way where the feel of them, the weight of them feels as though they could have been there forever, but they're new. It seems important to us.
Well, I'll second what Jeff said. I'm pleased to see the building reused. Certainly we have a set of rules and guidelines and so forth for all the character districts, and this is certainly in that, we call it an industrial character district, but it's in keeping with that, and it isn't an anomaly there. It's not a short building in a very tall environment. So I'm all in favor of what you're doing in concept. The details, I guess the other folks could comment on here, but some of the specifics of the staff saying we really would like to have one curb cut, I'm in favor of two, given the uniqueness of this site. If you didn't have the railroad slicing across one corner, it would be a very different kind of site plan.
Yeah.
So I think it makes good sense.
Okay.
I'd like to see a little more imaginative use of color on this project. Personal preference. So I don't know if in the end it's going to be just basically white and old metal panels, or some color on the frames of windows and doors and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think that there's, the wonderful thing is every day we make things better, right? That's what architects unfortunately do until the thing is built. So I think that there would be, I think that we're for sure going to color. I think the other thing, just kind of in our office when we're looking at things, and I'm sure Kurt's going to jump in and say something, is that I think until we properly put signage into this.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, it's, so a little bit of it is if you took a classic old gas station and you took the sign away, you would say, it just doesn't look that, and then you put the sign up and it was like, that thing's on the area because it ties into camera. So
I would want to be careful about compromising, I love that you're leaving the colors from the historic building. And just I would be careful adding color that you'd compromise the integrity of that.
Yeah.
But we're all for color. We talk a lot about that, but just doing it in a very sensitive manner, and maybe even focusing on the newer elements.
Yeah, I think the other thing too to remember is, I grew up in a 250-year-old inn, and it was all white. It was on the top of a hill in Connecticut, and so I just remember coming home. We had the old glass, and you look in, and the fire would be there, and the lights would be warm, and it was so important to have that white crispness to the warmth and color that came from within. And now you look at a lot of these houses where, you know, the outside is gray and taupe and all these colors, and it really kind of has hurt the ability of that inside to feel alive and to, you know, to feel the texture of the air. And I would say that, you know, in all of the Union Joints projects, you feel the thickness in the most wonderful way, the color of the air in the spaces. And I think that that's something that you're going to see coming out of those windows. It's just really, really important to hold on to. And something I'd never want to try and render. So.
I'll just jump in here, that I actually do a lot of preservation work, and we're working on a couple of old mills right now. They're much bigger than this, but I love that you're keeping this. I'm born and bred in Ann Arbor, and, you know, I'm kind of heartbroken that Fingerly was sold, and even though I understand all the reasons, but so happy that, you know, this piece of Ann Arbor is going to be there. And, you know, and I think all the comments about the guidelines are really interesting, because we really haven't come across much, you know, many projects like this.
Never,
Most of them have been these big, like Alexa said, you know, coming out to the edges of the property, maximizing FAR, and I'm so happy you haven't done that here, and you're making use of what's here, and, you know, in a really wonderful way. You can see the historic building, you can read it, you can see what's new, but it's contextual and not jarring. I guess just a couple comments. I'd like to hear what materials you're using, like for the guardrail up on top there. And then I also would like to hear more about the site itself, that the sidewalks and sort of curbs and things seem really, I don't know, urban or something. They're just, maybe something could be looked at there, something that really pulls from a gravel yard, you know, and what maybe tracks were going through, or if there was, you know, is there sort of a grid, or is there, I don't know.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great, I mean, I think that whole courtyard is sort of the thing that is the most fun to work on, and in a way, the simplest and hardest thing. And I think we've all sort of just been waiting for that moment to work on a little bit. We've got a good grading plan, so we just have to be really sensitive with floodway, not to mess around too much with how we're cutting and filling that. But I love the idea of thinking about that softness, you know, walking on the pea stone, right? I mean, all of those things are amazing. And certainly the shaping, I think, of how the courtyard is laid out is something that, as we begin to work through a little bit more, how that's occupied with the various things, that probably will evolve a little bit. The materials, so I guess to me when I look at the materials, it's a mixture of responding to the site and building in a way that seems in character with the site, with also understanding what's happened over time to the materials, and that a cast-in-place concrete building painted white is, this building built today would look absolutely different than this building does that's been here for who knows how long. So the connector pieces that you're seeing up here, this is proposed right now to just be a corrugated metal, very similar to the rest of the shed language that's going on throughout there. Glass doors on the end here. The rail, so right now the upper deck we're proposing to do in wood, just to have a little bit of softness in contrast to everything that's up there. We haven't, so right now the way we're thinking about the rail is that the rail would be galvanized. It would be galvanized metal, and I like it because I love the chalkiness of galvanized in relationship to the old concrete building. So it has a certain softness. And if you think about the sort of history of galvanizing, it's roads, it's industrial, right? I mean, it's all of the barricades and everything. So we're thinking that would be in galvanized, and then the way we've kind of rendered it to date is with stainless wire mesh panels. So I don't know if any of you guys have ever been to the High Line in New York, but the whole High Line is just that mesh. And I like it because it really allows air to flow, and it's actually a clearer visual than even glass is, just because you never get reflection off of it, and it's so little in terms of the size of it. So that's what we're sort of thinking. So it's kind of this mixture of the galvanized can say hello and work nicely with the chalkiness of the old concrete building, and then the stainless allows this a little bit more of a like contemporary industrial offset to it.
Thank you.
I when three of us up here wrote the guidelines, we're on the committee that wrote the guidelines, and I did just what Alexis did. I started looking through the guidelines, and I'm always the stickler on this group who says you're not conforming to C3, and I realized, just as Alexis said, that they don't apply, and we were thinking of something like this when we wrote them. So I'm happy to throw them out, and I'm glad to hear you say, though, that you understand, acknowledge some of the driving forces. And probably our biggest one that we tried to get into the guidelines throughout is the pedestrian experience. And I can see you've given a lot of thought to the pedestrian experience once they enter this sort of secret garden.
Yep.
And Alexis is right, it's a very inward opening building. But I wonder if you can talk a little bit, you said you were aware of things like the Allen Creek Greenway and the floodway and other things that are happening beyond the site. So what are your thoughts about the experience of the passerby, the pedestrian going by on either bordering street, looking in?
Yeah, so I think that obviously looking in, I think it's going to be an incredibly rich environment to look into. So in the wintertime, you'll see this little fort, right, that's been shoveled and plowed, and there are areas that are occupied, whether it's a yurt or a tent or an igloo out there. Like you're going to see this little land in there, right? So I think that that same fascination that we all have when we go look at an overview of a fort, you get up in the tower and you look at it, and it's just, everybody loves looking at a little model of something like that. So I think in a way that visual in provides that richness. I would say as far as the feel of, I think there's many things about cities and streets and topography and built environment that unfortunately have to be put into categories and design guidelines that ultimately aren't about that. They're more about how your body feels. So I would say that to me, over time, and it's nothing that Ann Arbor can help, but Ann Arbor has slowly erased the feeling of topography. That's the downside of large buildings, is you get so high that you no longer can feel the movement of the land. And so the beautiful thing that's left with the railroad tracks coming down and sort of splaying out and coming around the corner there, the beautiful thing that they've preserved is that corridor of topography and land, right? So we've stuffed a creek below the ground and done things like that, but that area of the land still has that flow and that movement that I would argue goes way back in time. And so I love the idea that as you're coming down the street, that on one side feels really tall and right, a couple little buildings on this side, you just feel like, oh, I meet up with the railroad tracks, here I come, and you flow into that site. So to me, there's something very natural about allowing that feel in the body and movement. And then on top of that, you're not just saying, oh, there's the flow into this new occupation of the space.
I'll have to think about that. No,
I think
that's interesting.
Yeah.
And looking at the view that's on the screen now, it sort of typifies, what Fingerly's went through. It was really utilitarian space and got built as they needed things. And they needed another shed to store wood, they built one.
Yep.
And so there wasn't a lot of thought. So it's sort of a real sort of slapdash gathering of what they needed to provide shelter and what they built over a long period of years. So there might be an opportunity to look for elements to sort of unify and calm that down a little bit instead of keep amping it up with more discontinuous elements and doing more of the same, the yurts and the igloos and everything else. I think there might be an opportunity here to calm it down a bit.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I think then, I don't know how it is for dining, but I mean, you could almost put a wall tent in there, right? And a wall tent might be more in keeping.
wall
A wall
tent?
tent. So if you think about the hunters' tents out west, so the old canvas tents, like if you were in the military and you traveled across,
Oh, I
you
see
set
what
up
you
that
mean.
tent, right?
Okay.
So there's these incredible old canvas tents that you can still buy. We bought some we did a little compound on Lake Michigan up north that's a series of these canvas tents with a deck in them and beds in them and power that people sleep in the summer. So, there are, I think, and if you think about that sort of traditional, very traditional gabled roof structure, the canvas, the porch in front of them, the courtyard, the fort, I think there are other things that can come in alignment with that. I think it's just looking at how the space is being used from the restaurant point of view and tying that in a little bit. But I would say I'm pretty sure that it's not going to look haphazard in that courtyard
Okay.
for sure. Yeah. And I would say I think that I think there's things that bring a sense of order. So, to me, there's a couple of things. One is responding to the architecture you're touching. So if you're touching that white chalky concrete appropriately, trimming out the rail above it in a way that separates itself but also complements it so that we don't feel as though there's just 200 feet of 12-inch folded aluminum brown trim on the building, right? So trying to really be sensitive about those things. The other thing is that repurposing and repositioning, I think, allows a certain sense of unification of the site. So right now, putting the green courtyard in the middle and having the concrete building open up onto that more, and then having the shed open up onto that, you really have a space that can be unified with the occupation of it, right, with being in there, if that makes sense. So.
We probably should wrap up in a couple minutes. We've got another applicant, but if you've got any
I wonder,
final,
yeah, I just was thinking about with this new use, it changes the perception that one can cut through that corner. It's been fingerly in the past, if we're people coming down Madison or coming down State, get onto the corner and turn. With this, it's pretty inviting to go, I'm just going to cut across that greensward. I like the notion of the green, but that's one element of what I'm going to say. The other is, as people are using the west shed, standing in front of it, picking up tacos or whatever they're going to be doing in the shed, I would think that the grass in front of that might get pretty well beat up. You might consider a slice of hardscape right along, parallel, maybe 3 feet wide across the front, to allow what's going to be natural, students and so forth are going to be cutting across. It gives a place to do that without through the lawn, and it also gives it potentially a useful area directly in front of that shed that doesn't always have to be rejuvenated.
Yeah. No, I think it's a great point. I mean, if you think about the history of universities and courtyards, I mean, every university puts, string around the courtyard to try and let the grass grow after ultimate frisbee. So,
I had one more comment. I'm not sure how you're going to, when you get to the code conformance piece, if it's rehabilitation code or what you're doing, but the Michigan Energy Code worries me on the spilling and how you comply. So there might be an opportunity over the north shed for solar energy. It seems to be right in the right spot. And you're not going to shade it, and
that's a
you
great
could get a pretty
idea.
good array up there, so it's something to think
Yeah,
about.
that's a really great thought. Yeah, for sure.
Great.
the last thing I wanted to ask you is if you would consider coming back for another design session.
Sure.
You don't have to answer now, but we encourage that, so as you
Yeah,
move
yeah.
along.
I
And
do,
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a great, I would say it's worth coming back once we've developed the courtyard area some more, because I think that really relates to a lot of the issues of pedestrian feel of things. And I also think, I mean, it's good on all sides, right? Because we can hear from you and you can hear from us, and it's just an ongoing process of working together. So absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know if you know, we're all from different sort of disciplines, and our two landscape architects and our planner are missing today, so
Yeah,
it'd be good to come back when they're here.
yeah, for sure.
All right,
Okay.
thank
All
you
right,
so much.
thank you.
Thank you.
Can we have about a 5-minute break so I can go feed my meter?
Okay, we have 5 minutes. Okay, we're going to take a 5-minute break.
I've got it on my phone, but
All right, I think I'd like to get started again. Does that start automatically? Oh, yeah, well, look at that. Thank you, and we're going to move in, no, we're going to do public comment on the group that we just saw. And
The
if you would,
project you just heard, I presume.
yes, the project that we just heard,
let me
state
say-
your name, and you've got
Can
3
you
minutes.
hear this microphone? Yeah, okay. Ethel Potts is my name, and when these downtown ordinances, D1 and D2, were written, we were nervous, we, the public, were nervous about some things. For instance, height, mass, scale, context in the neighborhood, and so forth. And we were reassured by the consultants and the staff that the character area overlays would take care of that will fine-tune things. Well, this is a character area overlay district, and you have another one on your agenda also. This is the first time I think I have experienced a situation of a proposal by a developer, a situation in which the character area might actually be being made use of. It might actually be useful to us. I assume that each of you has it in front of you. As you sit there, you're able to quote the intent of the character area for each of these. I presume you know that, because I know that. But there are other little things that I don't think were brought up too well. One is the Allen's Creek floodplain. The Fingerly's lumber floods regularly, very seriously. So how do we deal with that? We need to know more about that. And traffic is something of a problem down there at Main and Madison, so we need to hear a little more about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment on what we've just seen? Okay.
Hello, my name's Dennis Burke, and my home would abut and be right off the northeast corner of this proposed development. Back in 1982, I stood in the same position that these folks did with my architect, wanting to do a substantial rehab and development of a house that was in terrible condition. And we went through many, many architectural rounds and with you folks, and eventually we were turned down. So my wife and I decided at that time to salvage what we could and build a single-family home there. And I've brought up 2 children and made substantial investments in that property over the years. And I've been very delighted about the apartment buildings that have gone up south on South Main. I continue to see a lot of residential development and high-density housing on the south side of town, on the southeast side and the southwest. But I have very serious concerns about repurposing this building for this activity. Primarily, I'm concerned about the noise, especially with the terrace seating. I'm very concerned that the sheds would be repurposed and used for special events. I'm very concerned about the amount of off-street parking. I would echo what we've heard over here. If you want to see how bad the traffic is in that area, just come down there someday between 4:30 and 5:30 and stand at the corner of Madison and Main Street. I don't think they have near enough parking for staff and/or any of the patrons of the facility. I'm also concerned, Leopold Brothers, for those of you that remember, had a brewery that was just in an adjacent building to this. We had lots of problems over the years with Leopold Brothers with noise, not only myself, but many of the residents. This is a residential neighborhood. Called the police many, many times to come and have them turn the volume down and to try to quiet the crowd. So I just don't think the character of this neighborhood is such that we could tolerate really having this kind of facility in and about the residential with all of us folks that are trying to live there. All the investment that's been done for residential in that area, most of the business places are moving out. And then the hours of operation are a significant concern too. Fingerly's, closes at 5 o'clock. They're typically not open on most Sundays. Most of the businesses in the areas do close typically in the evening, and the evenings are quiet in that area of town. We do have a 7-Eleven that stays open, but these are just convenience stores and a gas station. But this facility, I think, would be open till 11, maybe 2 a.m. With frequent activities. They're talking about outdoor entertainment. I just don't see this as the proper use of that facility, of that building, being a commercial destination for eating and a lot of outdoor activities year-round.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Any other public comment? Okay. Moving on to the next project, which is 1100 South University Avenue. The applicant would like to step forward and make their presentation.
Tamara, can Alexis do that?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was like,
Yep.
Alexis hasn't
Yes,
talked
I
yet.
apologize. This is the first time we're doing this, so.
No problem.
That's fine. Thank you. This is a 1100 South University Avenue project, I believe currently known as the Vic Village South. It's Design Review Board project number DR19-003. Again, I'll give my brief summary of a zoning review and compliance with the downtown design guidelines. But first, a quick introduction. This is, This is a project that takes up most of the block on the south side of South University, between East University and Church Street. It'll redevelop 7 lots with a 13-story high-rise building, student-focused housing above some first-floor commercial space with 2 levels of parking below. They will use the residential and the affordable housing premium options to get close to 900% floor area ratio. Access to the parking garage is going to be either off of Church Street or East University. The included design plans have access from Church Street that may be switched to East University. I'll let the applicant speak a little bit more about that. A cursory review of zoning indicates that it does or will comply with all the standards. Areas that should be confirmed are the massing articulation. And regarding site planning, we found that all of the subcategories for site context and site planning do apply. They are providing the urban pattern and the features in urban patterns and forms that enrich the pedestrian experience. The site layout does include some open space, particularly in front of in the thin strip in front of the buildings and at the corners that have appropriate urban qualities. Parking, driveway, service areas have been designed for minimal impacted pedestrians. We would note it's not zero impact, but they have been designed for minimal impact. There is a pedestrian connection on the south side, in sort of a mid-block connection. For the buildings, one of the premises of the design guidelines is for the building to be reflect the character of its area. And I would say that the South University area is really no longer a low-scale neighborhood when we're talking about buildings on South University. So in that sense, this building does fit in with its context. There is one existing and remaining lower-scale building, but from the renderings, it does not appear that this new building is a looming or hulking presence. It appears that it can fit nicely within. We find for building elements that all the categories are applicable and that they do provide a strong street edge and street level entries and a high level of first floor transparency. And I understand that the applicant is here to give a brief presentation.
I will use the mic. I've heard to use the mic. Thanks, Alexis. My name is Sean Rivera. I'm the VP of Construction for Hughes Properties. We're the developer of the project. With us is Pat Fix with the owner as well. And we have Diane McIntyre and Dave Nims with the architect who are going to be discussing more of the design items. I just want to give a kind of a brief overview of where we're at, how we're moving forward. So there's obviously a lot of information that is missing within the packet, such as unit counts, things along those lines. And the reason for that is we met with planning probably about a month or so ago as we started to discuss this project, primarily as it had to deal with how we were going to handle the curb cut issue. And one of the things that Alexis recommended to us, and one of the things that we like to do with our projects, is to come more than once to the design review board. So we primarily wanted to come forward because the curb cut issue, while will affect a little bit of the facade there as you go down East University, if it gets moved to there, the primary aspects of the building will not change on the front facade aspects of this building. We are in the process of working with engineering and planning and the DDA to evaluate the curb cut issues. We're going to also discuss and go back with the architect and our ownership team to talk a little bit more about how where we put it at, how that impacts the overall massing of the building, overall impacts the FAR that we're able to achieve as well. I think Alexis's report states about 785 right now, and we really want to look at maximizing the affordable housing component and maximizing the overall FAR, all of which is done within the 150 feet that we're allowed in that area. So primarily want to come forward, get your initial thoughts and views in regards to what the renderings and the elevations look like. Our intent is coming back again for a second review once we have finalized the full unit mix, the floor plates, final elevations based upon some of your comments today, as well as depending on where the curb cut is at. And with that, I will hand that over to the architect to talk more through the design aspects, and then obviously we'll answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Sean. Good afternoon. My name is Diane McIntyre with Hobbs & Black Architects, here to speak on the Vic Village South project. As Alexis and Sean explained, this is a 13-story high-rise. It is located on the south side of South University Avenue. We are flanked by Church Street and East University Avenue. And I'm going to take a moment to walk you through the site plan and floor plans quickly, and then lead us to the building elevations and perspectives. There we go. Here's showing the site plan on South University Avenue. And to orient yourself, this is the current location of the PNC Bank, and we're also flanked by the Good Time Charlie's building. Good Time Charlie's, of course, staying, and the other 1- and 2-story buildings on that block would become the proposed residential high-rise. And if you've been around Ann Arbor for a little while, you've probably seen all the development in this area, predominantly student housing high-rises on South University, Church, and East University. And these are some context photos as we go around the site, different university buildings, student housing high-rises. Still an eclectic feel for some buildings that are remaining. We have Pizza House, and as we move down the block, obviously the University Towers, China Gate. And here we are at the site plan again, which begins to show you that the proposed building is looking to extend to the property lines along the north and west. And currently we have the garage entry located along Church Street. And as Sean mentioned, we are looking at the possibility of, pros and cons of this location we have shown, or also the East University side of the building. And this also shows the pedestrian walkway that would connect mid-block, both East University and Church Street, across the south portion of the building. Two levels of below-grade parking are proposed, with the first floor predominantly retail and commercial space, bike storage as well. And as we move up the building, mostly residential, and also some amenity spaces as well. And up at the top level, level 13, predominantly amenity spaces and rooftop patios. So you can see on the elevations, and I think it may be clearer on the perspectives, but the use of materials is predominantly brick, and there's also metal panel materials at the vertical recesses that run through the building. Changes in brick colors. There are 3 different colors, and we'll see that later. And then the top floor predominantly more of a glass material that's stepped back further than the rest of the building facade. There's also the primary entrance, the residential entrance on South University Avenue, not right at the corner of South University and East University, whereas that space would be dominated more by a retail presence and an outdoor open space. This is showing the back or south facade of the building. And then we're going to look at east and west quickly. A preliminary section of the building showing the building height at 150 feet above the grade plane. And the 150 feet is to not so much the top of the building as the top of any mechanical screens, and would also incorporate the elevator overrun as well. Again, the different brick colors from nutmeg, sienna, ebony, cast stone elements. And then the perspective of the building showing some of the surrounding buildings as well, with a dominant glass vertical architectural feature at the northwest corner of the site, directly diagonal from the Dennison Archway at the university. Bit more of the facade on the north and west sides, showing predominantly brick materials. You can also see Good Time Charlie's, and I think has been discussed before, a 2-story high street wall at the property line, and then a step back of about 5 feet after that point for the 3rd through 12th floors, with another step back at the top floor. And I believe that may be the last slide. So I would welcome any questions you may have.
Well, the curb cut is that it's a concern because there are 3 curb cuts in a row there. Is that the challenge?
You want me to explain it?
I can do it. I'll go back to the site plan. I hope.
Yeah. No, just before that.
Oh,
Yeah.
all right. Right, so on the east side of the site, you'll see what's currently a service drive, which would have its curb cut, and this is also a shared drive with 611, and you can correct me. And then this would be a curb cut for the residential parking. And then there's also a curb cut currently for the Good Time Charlie's site right here. So it's 3 curb cuts in a row with some pedestrian islands in between. There are pros and cons to putting the curb cuts on either side. Over here, where we've shown a proposed curb cut, there's actually quite a bit more pedestrian traffic that we would need to consider. Obviously, safety is a concern. So we're looking at both sites now, and we have a traffic analysis that's helping to guide us. Yeah.
So it's work in progress, you're saying?
It's really in engineering and
Yeah.
DDA's in their hands to
Yeah.
kind of give us some indication.
And we're working with them to give us some guidance and indication.
Just, this is really a minor point, but while you have that plan up, it looks to me like all your doors on the South University side swing out. Is that what you're intending?
Those doors, I guess, could swing in or out, and I think they disappeared if we had them swinging in at this point on the site plan, so.
I think bicycles are going to love
Yeah.
that. And I don't think it was allowed to swing out into the.
No.
That was just a minor comment.
And the first thing that caught my eye is that corner that is framed as you walk through the barrel vault from the diag, and it's the corner of the building at Southview and Eastview. And I just wonder, as you worked it out, I know that the entry that just on that previous slide, that is on Southview, is this real elegant two-story precast piece that looks really nice. And so that is your primary entrance to the bulk of the building because it's perpendicular to the corridor system. And doing something like that at that corner that we're looking at would be more difficult because I think the corridor system would need to become diagonal or do something odd. Was that the challenge? That corner is such an opportunity because it's so perfectly framed as you're coming through the barrel vault, and the whole south view emerges as you walk across the diag. It's the first thing that you see, and being the first impression of the building, it just seems like an area that you might be able to give more thought to.
Part of it, in regards to the mid-block, is obviously when you deal with the core aspects of the systems for the elevator, so that obviously drives a lot of it. From the student perspective, where they enter the building, they're going to learn where they need to enter the building at. In regards to the corner aspect, because that first floor retail tenant is there, we wanted to make that corner via a retail tenant to be an active corner from a retail perspective. So the retail tenant there will be able to have that area that's, I got to look at which plan it is, but they can come out, activate that corner, and activate that as you come in. Part of the reason why we did the glass there was for that aspect to draw your eye to that corner as well. But to utilize that as a main entrance into the building just doesn't have a lot of, you lose a lot of efficiencies by doing that.
Yeah, I'm not worried about the students. I know they'll find it, and I know they'll fill it. But I do worry about it. It's the view that we get of the building, and as we walk across the diag, and it's our first impression as we're also headed east on Southview. It's the first tall building we're going to see, and that corner is really critical. And I hate to give it over to whoever the retail person is for their advertised awning, and it just seems like architecturally it's an opportunity that you're not taking. And I know it's difficult. The rest of the building is really elegant and well done. I just wish you could think about that corner some more, make it a little more special.
Okay. We'll put a clock on there for Bill.
No clock. No clock.
Took the words right out of my mouth.
I just don't want to walk through the arch and see Starbucks or something. I want to walk through the arch and see something that is iconic of Ann Arbor and a part of the architectural language of the building.
We'll take a look at that.
Yeah, I completely agree with that comment. This is such a great opportunity for this corner, and when you look at it in plan and you see the social work building pulled back, and there's actually sort of a recess almost in the northeast corner as well. And then, I really like what you've done with the glass in the corner. You haven't tried to mimic the arch and put a angled wall at the corner, but you let it be a little bit light and with the glass going up, but then the base, and I don't know if that's, Dick, is where you're having the issue, but just what to do with that corner. It seems awkward. The plan seems, that nook, that niche seems a little mean, like it's a little, it's not symmetrical, it's a little narrow. I don't see people cutting through there very well. But if you could take that corner, and again, I don't have any great answers for what to do there, but to do something that reacts to this very important corner at this important intersection at the university. And not just, have a little nook with one little door in it, it just seems like it's way understated.
More of a presence.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah,
don't think
I
Dick
think
is
that's right.
suggesting that you try to reorient that's a main entrance to the building. It still will be the entrance to a tenant, but that tenant could be thrilled if it's even something more dramatic. Right
Gotcha.
now it is, come in and swing a door in and you go into the space. You got a lot of opportunities to do something really significant there.
No, all good, really good comments. We'll take a look at that. Glad for clarifying what portion we were talking about, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, if I can speak for Dick, I think he was saying he liked the entry to the students, the materials and the
I do,
presence
yeah.
of it, and just doing something that's that kind of
Makes it-
statement at that corner, not moving the
Yeah,
entrance down.
the entry on the north elevation, the flat elevation, is really well done. And it's very elegant and understated.
The
and,
vestibule.
Yeah, there it is. That, I think that's a real nice touch. And so, something with the same mindset at the corner, or, you'll find an opportunity there.
Yeah, while we're talking about that portal there, I like it also. I think it's a bit awkward the way the brick to the right of it comes in. It's seems a little bit stuck on, and I was wondering if it could be reworked somewhat so it's a little more by itself. If there's you've got these vertical. I don't know if those are glass and metal panels that go up between the brick. Is that right?
Yes, between,
Between sort of the brick facade pieces.
right.
It must be,
Talking about these?
yeah.
In
up
the face of
between.
those columns, there's a dark
Oh, that
vertical.
light, I think that's meant to be a light. You mean on the
Oh,
other
no.
side of the entrance?
No, I was talking about either, like to the left, right there.
Oh, there.
That,
Glass
and then you've got
glass
another.
and metal.
And then you've got another one a little bit over on the far
Whoops,
side,
over
but
here.
it just, maybe if that apartment could be a little bit more set off and not just sort of a side of one of these segments. It's off to the side there. So maybe just look at that. The other thing is for that entry, I don't know if there's any opportunity to, because it is very flat, the whole facade's very flat. Is there an opportunity to push those doors back to create a bit of a recess for the entry and then pull a canopy out so you get kind of that feel where you're walking down and suddenly you're getting a little bit of a deeper and more protected entry. You probably are going to have to swing those doors out because of code.
Probably looking very similar to what we did on the other side where that main entrance is set back a little bit. There isn't an awning per se there, but pulling that entrance back a little bit so you create a little bit more of a, more inviting, and it's not just bam right there at the
Yeah, keep
property
your
line.
portal on the
It's a
outside,
big
but
vestibule.
just
Yeah.
push, yeah,
Yeah.
push
understood.
back.
I'm really happy. We've seen a lot of buildings in this district, and more than one of them with you, Sean. And sometimes in the past, the material changes are expressed with just maybe a 4-inch reveal here and there. And in flat elevation, they look effective, but in perspective and in reality, they remain flat. And that didn't happen here. I really appreciate that the floor plane is actually changing and there are deeper reveals. And so when the materials change, it expresses an actual mass. I think you did a real nice job with that. We appreciate it.
Thank you, that's all then.
And hope you keep that and not let it like flatten out as you're
Yeah.
developing it.
Keep those reveals.
Keep
Yeah.
the depth,
Yeah.
Good.
On the first floor, that's not a hard thing.
yeah.
I have a question on the east elevation. Is that set back from that building property line, from this short building? Are you set back from that property line? The question is if they build another building up against it sometime.
We're set back about 5 feet from that property line, and We were looking at the design of those units to not have to have windows on that side, and we do have quite a few shown. But we're aware that
Of course you are.
someone could build right up to their property line, and that happens more often than you'd like.
Yeah, I'm not sure if somebody were to build up to the property line on that side, whether there would be some code-related issues as far as firewall requirements.
Yeah, once they would have to pretty much set back in order to have any windows unless they went up with a complete block building, but then obviously that poses challenge on how they construct it because they have to encroach on our property. So obviously at the first two levels, it's not hard because you're building right against the other building. And once you get above, we can set back and give us that 5 feet we need in order to skin our building, brick the building, all of that. We just did that with the University of Michigan Credit Union building that they have right next to us on the north side, where we stepped it back so we didn't have to encroach on their property or vice versa. So yeah, that definitely becomes a building code issue.
Well, when 101 North Main got developed, there were some windows. This is the building at Huron and Main Street, another Hobson Black building. But there were windows in the west wall of that building, and the planning, or the building department or planning department, one or the other, made certain that the developer knew that if another building got built next to it, which now the hotel is there, that they would lose those windows and that they would have to make them comply with the firewall requirements.
Compliant because of the fact that we're 5, yeah.
Yeah, we're set back far enough for building code issues.
5 feet is
And then we didn't want to create the east facade to be too blank, although we're well aware that how we designed those units along that east facade, we're having most of them have their natural light coming from the north or the south, just in case.
right.
It looks like the lobby or the corridor has got most of the windows
Right.
there, so.
For the larger the setback, the larger the percentage of glazing you can have on that wall. Is it 25% for 5 feet? Is that,
I think it is 25% from what I recall.
because that looks like more than
And
25%.
I think that we're right at
You're right at it.
25%.
All right, okay.
Well, I really like the treatment of the lower 2 floors, the way that has been articulated. It almost reminds me of separate buildings rather than, one long mass. So I think that got handled really, really well.
I think there are some nice canopies also that may be kind of hard to see. Only because, things become so small at the scale. But we've tried to incorporate canopies all along here.
Yeah.
You had a blow-up of one, I think, on one sheet, didn't you? On the brick, was it the brick sheet? Yeah, I like
Oh.
that,
Oh, yeah.
there, yeah. I would echo what Jeff said about almost the separate buildings. It feels like you haven't overdone the kind of layering of brick, that you've done some of that with the lighter brick over the darker brick, but it's not overdone. I had been thinking, I almost wanted to see some variation in the height of that street wall pieces, but I don't know, I'm a little torn on that.
I think one of the comments too that was made in Alexis's report, I think, Alexis, you can clarify your intent, if my understanding was correct, is that let me go back. So the portions like we have along the front there where that cornice is at, was your comment there of varying that cornice? Was that one of the comments I read? Because if that's the one comment, obviously we would like your guys' thoughts on that as well.
I did comment that more variation in the height of cornice lines and projecting features to express the different modules might be considered. I actually was talking about the height, or the very top of the building, but I think the same would apply to the height of the street wall. My personal opinion is maybe the street wall doesn't need as much change in height because it is lower, literally lower, but the top of the building was a pretty solid line of top of building for almost the length of a block. And I thought a little up and down vertical might add interest, but I'm a planner and not an architect.
I do construction, I don't design, so.
Like what was done on the west facade. There's a little bit of height variation on that.
What's your time frame on this?
So our intent, obviously pending on when we get back from engineering and planning, and is hopefully we will come back in May with the overall redesign of the building. And then obviously that will kick off the site plan process, and that usually takes about 6 months, I think now, Alexis, or somewhere in there. You know, we're looking at trying to start demolition towards the end of the year. It would be what we're looking at. Obviously, that's all pending site planning, all that process, permitting with the city, obviously, but that's kind of our intent right now.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm good.
It's a nice building.
It looks good.
I think through a few times we've learned.
So you did say, I think you were going to come back again.
Yeah, we will be definitely coming back again. We wanted this preliminary to get some of your preliminary views. So as we move into the final configuration of the building, obviously, once we know the configuration with the curb cut, we can finalize the building massing. We've just finalized with our operator our unit mix that we're looking at. So now Hobbs and Black can go back, try to lay out units as well, so we can finalize what that all is going to look like. And then we can come back with the more robust information. We'll have obviously more views of what, depending on what church looks like, we'll have what church looks like, so on and so forth. We'll have more of those pronounced elevations.
Yeah, and I think
Yep.
I'd say, from what I heard, that corner is probably the
Biggest
most
item. Yep,
critical
we'll definitely
item.
be looking hard at that corner.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
At this point, we can entertain comments from the public.
See if I can get this down near me. Does that work? Thank you. It might work. There we go. Okay, thank you. Again, this is a character overlay district on South University. And what it says in the zoning ordinance, what it says is this is a mix of building types and sizes with retail uses on the street level and relatively narrow lot widths. The intent for this district is to maintain a variety in scale with design that reflects the small scale widths and heights of buildings. The taller portions of buildings are to be located towards the interiors of the lot, away from any lot lines and any sidewalks. The South University character area lies just outside the DDA boundaries and adjacent to neighborhoods. The intent for this district is to maintain a variety of small-scale commercial and retail enterprises mixed with some residential uses, minimizing the impact on nearby residential streets. This project does none of these things. I think actually it's a very good example of doing the opposite.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay. Next item on the agenda is if there's any planning commission communications.
There is not, and I would have deferred in the interest of time anyway.
Yes, okay. All right, and then no communications, I assume? Oh, no, there's one, sorry, that was going on. The letter, there was a letter from
Yeah, here it is.
what's that?
It's from Jeff. So from Chris Graham. You see it?
Yeah, I did see it. Any other public comment on anything further? Okay. Then I believe we are adjourned. Thank you very much, and thanks for being patient in going over.